Our scripture lesson today is taken from the book of Acts, chapter 9, verses 36 through 43. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples who heard that Peter was there sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. Well, this is the second week of this 4-week series I'm calling Launch, where we are talking about lessons from the book of Acts, that story of the start of the church, and the lessons that it may give to us about starting up or maybe starting over a part of our lives. Last week we talked about this idea of recasting failure as something that we learn from, as a necessary thing that we grow from. And this week we're going to be talking about potential. Now, last week I mentioned this author, Tina Seelig, who wrote this book, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, all right? And she's a professor at Stanford, and she started this class where she had this little contest, and it grew into something much bigger there, but it began in a pretty simple way. She divided them into teams. I'm not sure how the teams were created, but they were all in teams of people, and then she gave each team an envelope with $5 in it, and said, you have an unlimited amount of time to plan, and you can use whatever you have with you. You can use, if you have your cell phone or your car, you can use that stuff. That doesn't count. But you can't use more than the $5. And when you open the envelope, you have 2 hours to make as much money as you can. So, some ideas come to mind for you. What would you do? I hear some of the standard ideas that people had was, well, I'll go to the store and I'll buy lemonade mix, and we'll have a lemonade stand. I'll buy some cups and a bucket of country time or whatever, and we'll do that. And she said that makes a little bit of money. Or I'll buy some soap and a bucket and a sponge, and we'll do a car wash outside. And she said, all right, that works. That'll make a little bit of money. But she said the most interesting thing was this. The teams that made the most money didn't spend the $5 at all. See, and that was the reframing, all right? As soon as you gave them the envelope with the $5, they start thinking, how do I spend the $5 to make the money? And she said, no, the people who made the most money didn't actually even spend the $5. Here was one of the most creative ones. All right, this. So it's Stanford, so they're in Palo Alto. So they waited till the weekend. Remember, you could have unlimited amount of time to plan. They waited until the weekend, and they went to restaurants that were always overcrowded, and they went, and the restaurants, they have those pagers, right? I mean, a lot of them are now texting you, but at this time, they had those pagers that they handed out. So they just split up, and they each went to different restaurants and put themselves online for a pager. Then they went back and offered to sell their early time pager to a person who was later in line for $20. Would you like to bump up early? Here, $20, we'll sell you our pager. And then the pager that they got, they were able to sell that to a person who was even later in line. So they kept flipping pagers down the line at different restaurants. Brilliant, right? The team that made the most money did this. You see, because here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to come up with your idea, talk about what you did, your process, and you had 3 minutes. So your team made a 3-minute presentation to the class. The team that made the most money went to a company and sold them their 3-minute presentation time to do recruiting among a bunch of Stanford students. Total genius. They said, how would you like to have 3 minutes of FaceTime in front of this whole class and recruit for your company? And they sold their 3-minute slot That's thinking outside the box. See, what they did was they didn't limit themselves to what was the obvious frame of the problem. They reframed it more broadly. They thought more broadly. They said, what's the real potential of this situation without thinking about the $5? And they made more money. Our story today is one that you may think that you hear all the time because there were so many healings in the Bible. Now, there's a couple of interesting aspects of this. For example, this story refers to Tabitha as a disciple. And in the Greek, this word disciple means learner, okay? And so there's a Greek word mathetes, which refers to learner. But as a lot of words, there's a male form and a female form of it. And the female form of the word disciple is mathatria, female disciple. And this is the only time it's used in the New Testament. Tabitha is the only woman in the entire New Testament to be given the title disciple. So it's just kind of a little bit of trivia. It's a little interesting that this is the case. And one of the things about that is that it talks about how she was devoted to good works and acts of charity. And there's an implication there that she was a person of some means, who then used her means for good rather than for herself. And so she dies, which is also a lesson, by the way, that keeps going through the Scriptures. Just because you're faithful doesn't mean bad things don't happen to you. All right, we just say it over and over and over again. Only one of the apostles is believed to have died a natural death. Okay? Faithful does not mean you are insulated from difficult times. It does not mean that bad things don't happen to you, all right? She's the only woman in the Bible to be given the title disciple, and she falls ill and she dies. Now, when Peter shows up, they're showing Peter all this stuff that she did. So, the thing, you're showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. It doesn't say why they did this. Maybe they were trying to show Peter how worthy she was of his care. It does imply that she took her resources and devoted them to making things that could be used by other people. All right, so there's an implication here that she's taking her resources and devoting it to the good of others. And this is why they love her and care about her so much. But when she dies, they summon Peter. And they just say, please come to us without delay. Now, remember, she had already been dead. They said they had washed her body, they had laid it out, and so she's not just sick, she's dead. And it never actually says why they summoned Peter. Okay? Like, I'll tell you as a pastor, or if somebody calls me up and says, we need you to come over, someone close to us has died, I'm thinking perform the funeral. I'm not thinking they're calling me to raise them. Maybe I should. Okay. But it never says, come to us and raise her from the dead. It never says that. It just says, come to us. What was it? Was it come to bring comfort? Was it come to pray over her and pray that she be received into heaven? We don't know what it was, but it just said, please come. Right? And it says Peter got up and went. Again, no discussion of what he intends to do. He just hears that someone has a problem and he says yes, not knowing what it means. He just says, yes, I'm going to go. And by the way, at this point in the Bible, the thing to remember is that Peter's never raised anyone from the dead. Okay? So he's not done this before. So I'm not sure he's even thinking that this is what I'm going to do because he hasn't done this yet. But he decides to go. And deciding is the first step in anything. There's this person named Lewis Pugh. He's an environmentalist and an endurance swimmer. And he brings attention to environmental issues by endurance swimming in the most remarkably harsh conditions. He has actually managed to swim across both the North Pole and the South Pole. He swam across the Antarctic ice cap by finding these rivers that have been cut through the ice because of global warming. So he highlights that you can actually swim, that there's actually water there, and he swims across. I don't think in one step, but he does it. He does this to bring attention. He's got a very large foundation that's involved in issues. But he said this very simply. He said, "You are always one decision away from a completely different life." It's one decision. Peter decided to go. It changed how many lives because he just decided that he was going to go. He may not have had a plan. He certainly had no experience at this. He just decided to go, and things changed. And when he goes, it says he put all of them outside. Why? Again, it doesn't say. I put myself in his position. I don't know. Maybe I would put. Ever done this? Ever want people to not watch you in case you fail? Please don't look at what I'm doing in case I really mess it up. Okay. Put all of them outside. And then he knelt down and prayed. And I really wonder if he even knew what was going to happen before he prayed. Maybe he was saying, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. It doesn't say what his prayer was. Maybe his prayer was, God, show me what it is that's supposed to happen here. I'm not sure exactly what it is I'm supposed to do. I've never raised anyone from the dead before. Or if he did know, maybe he didn't know what it would look like or what it would take. Maybe reanimation is really hard to watch. We have no idea why, but he puts everyone outside so that it's only him and this body. And then he prays. But then he says, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes. He didn't know, he couldn't be sure that he could do this before he went, but he decided to go anyway. There's a pastor, I heard him this week speak, and one of the things he was talking about was sort of on this kind of topic. His name's Crawford Loritz. He's a pastor. He was actually a pastor of a church in New Jersey, a very large church. And he said this. He said, decision precedes development. He said, you see, you decide, and then you learn. All right. You don't really get very far if all you do is just say, I'm going to practice and then see what I'm good at. You decide what you want to do, and then you develop toward it. All right? You decide, and then you develop. If I were Peter, I probably wouldn't have been so bold. And I think that's one of the continual things I critique about myself is not thinking big enough. I don't know if I would have had the courage to actually try and raise a human being, I probably would have started with like a goldfish. You come downstairs, you see the you have a goldfish, come downstairs, see the goldfish floating in the bowl. I probably would have said, let me start small. Let me see if I can do a goldfish. I'll work my way up to people, but let me start with this. But that's a half-hearted approach. I don't think that works. And I think I'm often guilty of it, of not going all out. See, I think we need to decide that we can before we know that we can. I think we need to decide to believe in ourselves, which I think, by the way, is an essential part of parenting. As we're here on Mother's Day, I think an essential part of parenting is nurturing kids to believe in themselves, to believe in what can be done. But another thing about that is I think that sometimes we believe that nurturing people to achieve potential has to always be a matter of effort. You have to try, you have to strive, you have to work. And I'm not sure that's always the case. I think there might be another way to think about it. And it's this. When I was learning about, very elemental physics in science class, whether I forget where this was, late grade school or early high school or whatever, one of the things you learned about was potential energy, right? So you learn about potential energy, and potential energy is stored energy. And you learn that if you have a ball, and I hold it here, this ball has what? Potential energy, right? Now, you probably all know the answer to this. How do I turn the potential energy into kinetic energy? I just let go. That's all I have to do. I just let go. In fact, what I'm doing right now in order to prevent the potential from being released is I'm actually expending effort to hold it up. I'm actually actively stopping the potential from being released by holding it here. In order to release the potential, all I have to do is let go. And I wonder if a lot of times in our lives we're actually working to stop the release of the potential within us. I wonder if we're actually fighting it. I wonder if we're actually afraid of it. I wonder if we're actually not listening to it. And what we're doing is we're actually preventing the potential from being released because we're holding it up instead of just letting go. See, I think a lot of times in our lives, God is calling us, God is putting an urging on us, God is putting something on our hearts to do it, and what we're actually doing is committing the sin of resistance, and we're clouding the resistance. We're trying to shroud that resistance with language like, well, I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I'm able. Maybe I need to start small. Maybe I need to think differently. And what we're actually doing is resisting the call that God is putting on us to move in a particular direction, to do something. And that all we would actually have to do to release the potential that God has placed within us is to let go. That if we just let go, if we simply surrender to the potential that's within us, it would be released. See, I think a lot of times, and I look back on my life and I think God put things on my heart, and my sin was not murdering someone or something like that. My sin was simply finding 1,000 reasons not to do it. It was too big, too hard, would take too long. But what I really needed to do, to obey, was surrender, let go of my resistance, and unleash the potential. See, if our potential comes from God, it's going to be scary. It's going to be greater than what we understand. All right? It's going to be frightening. I mean, I talked about what happens when I get called because someone has passed, and I go to the family, and I expect to be asked to perform a funeral, to pray with them, and I know how to do those things. I've been trained how to do those things. If somehow I were able to raise them from the dead, I don't think there's anyone more frightened than I would be. I would be absolutely terrified. I would not be sitting there going, oh, cool. Look what I can do. It's awesome. I'd be terrified. I think you would be too. What does this mean? And yet, maybe we need to be willing to be scared in that way. To be frightened by how much we could actually accomplish if we just surrender to the potential that God has placed within us. Because I think that a lot of times it's us who are keeping ourselves boxed in. We aren't surrendering to what God would have us do. So I encourage you to think about some of the urgings that have been placed and all the reasons you may have for not following that urging, and to just release your potential by surrendering to it. Reframe your circumstances to think more broadly, to think about what could be. And that box that we like to keep ourselves in because the box feels safe, because the box feels familiar. Well, next week, as we go into week 3 of this series, we're going to talk about what it takes to expand the box, because that is absolutely what happened in the early church. The box they thought they were going to operate within, the rules they thought they were going to operate by, were out the window. And we're going to talk about that next week in week 3 of launch. Amen. I thought about actually dropping the ball, but I thought that would really be noisy. See? Kept the potential from being released, found many good reasons not to drop the ball. Okay? Because thought about it, it would be noisy, it would clack. Also, it might roll under the stage and I wouldn't be able to get it back for the 11 o'clock service. Lots of reasons that I found not to surrender to the potential of the ball. Now the sermon's actually over.